Namaskar Guruji.
Namaskar friends.
Well, today the topic in the theme. What is the theme? Yoga and the next millennium. And today the topic I have chosen is a strange one, a psychology of mind. Psychology of mind, or could be called Mentology.
Before I commence, let me tell you one thing.
After I talked yesterday on the same theme, a Western inquiry was, or Western reaction was, why is it that I am pessimist in saying that we will have to wait for some centuries, while the Eastern mind came and reacted? How is it that I am so optimistic that within a couple of centuries such revelations, wonderful revelations, can take place? So, well, the Western mind thinks that I am being pessimist, Eastern mind thinks that I am being optimist, but let me tell you,
I am neither pessimistic
nor optimistic, but I am trying to be realistic.
So the point is, I am neither optimistic nor pessimistic. I am trying to be realistic. It is going to take that much of time, and it's not a long time. Anyway, now coming to this topic of this moment, the psychology of mind. Think over for it. The more you think, more confused will you get. Because the very concept of psychology of mind is perplexing. Because we think that psychology is nothing but functioning of the mind. For us, the psychology is functioning of the mind. And therefore, it is quite perplexing to conceptualize something like psychology of the mind itself. We can easily conceptualize something like child psychology, psychology of the child, or psychology of adolescence, psychology of men, psychology of women, psychology of society, psychology of mob, psychology of mass, psychology of students. So these are concepts with which we are very, very familiar. But we fail to conceptualize something like the psychology of the mind itself. But the next millennium will find no difficulty because of yoga. Yoga will help have familiarity with such an intriguing concept. Now I will try to give you a preview of that subject which is going to come up. Now can you think over on the concept psychology of the mind yourself? As I said, the more you think, the more you will be confusing yourself. The more you think, you will implicate yourself. Now look, let us try to explicate the situation that we are in. When we say child psychology, do you know what do we mean by that? What is implied in child psychology? Listen carefully. It is the behavior of the being uncharacteristic to itself in that phase, on account of that phase. Listen once again. It is a behavior uncharacteristic to the being, but characteristic to that phase. Because the child is not going to behave that way once it crosses the phase. Because the child is never ever the child. It is only a phase in life. To be a child is just a phase. And therefore it is uncharacteristic to the being, but characteristic to the phase. Do you get it? So by being a child, it behaves that way. Otherwise it would not have behaved that way. This is what is implied in child psychology. Similar is the case in all other instances. For example, mob psychology. You and me get caught in the mob, and we behave uncharacteristically to ourselves and characteristic to the mob. So in mob psychology, an individual does not behave in the manner the individual would have done by being out of the mob. Just by being in a mob, that individual behaves in a peculiar manner, uncharacteristic manner. So also any such situation, condition like student psychology. By being students, by being with the students, that individual behaves like students, therefore uncharacteristic to the being, but characteristic to the phase or situation or condition. So also women's psychology. The being a woman behaves that way. So also men's psychology. The being a man behaves that way. So therefore, in all these concepts, child psychology, mob psychology, mass psychology, student psychology, women's psychology, men's psychology, what we have got to understand is that one behaves uncharacteristically to the being, but characteristically to the phase or situation or condition. This is how we have got to understand these concepts. Now, such situations are also experienced by all of us. I told you yesterday that we identify ourselves with the mind. If the mind is happy, we say, I am happy. If the mind is sad, we invariably say without exception that I am sad. From lunatic to wise savant sages. From lunatic to wise yogis. Everyone identifies oneself with the mind in the business of life. And therefore, the condition that if the mind is happy, the person is happy. If the mind is sad, the person is sad. As I said yesterday, there is never ever a case, even in mental hospitals, you will not come across such a case that the person saying that my mind is sad but I am happy, or my mind is happy but I am sad. Therefore, whether the person is lunatic or wise, no exception whatsoever, absolutely no exception. So much is the identity with the mind. But still we have not taken a clue, despite every one of us have experienced a condition whereby we can conclude that we are not the mind. You don't have to go to the metaphysics, you don't have to go to the philosophy to have such an experience or to have such a concept. You think that it's only philosophy can perhaps tell us that we are not the minds, and unless you are a student of philosophy, unless you have understood philosophy, you can't imagine that such a concept can be crystallized. But that's not the case. Every one of us at some point of time had such a clue or have clue or will be having clues that we are not the mind. But that is deprecated, looked down upon. I will give a simple instance. Many times we say, how stupid was my mind? What does it imply? It implies that I am not stupid, but my mind was stupid at that point of time. I am not stupid, But on that particular point of time or situation, condition, my mind was stupid. So therefore, we many times have such expressions, how stupid was my mind. Have you not come across such a condition? Yes or no? Or many times we have said, how mean was my mind? How did I behave so brutally? How did I behave so stupidly? It means that the mind can behave uncharacteristically to us. Do you get it? Now usually, as I told you just now, the problem that we get is that most of the time we identify ourselves with the mind, and therefore it is very difficult to conceptualize, crystallize something like we are not the minds. And we think that it's only philosophical mind that can have the divergence of such a situation. But as I told you, because of a branch of psychology that will evolve after a few centuries, or if you think that sounds pessimistic, maybe a few decades you can take it, few tens of decades. As I told you, a subject like Mentology is going to emerge. And one more clue I will give you here to understand that the mind is different than the psyche. Those who have psychological defect, it implies that something is wrong with the brain. When there is a psychological defect, the person has particular characters. So if something goes wrong with this psychological faculty, it is possible that not much will happen to the body. Many times we come across mad, lunatic people that they have strength and power more than that of two human beings. You will not be able to manage one mad person. The mad person can be very, very strong physically, more than a common human being. But if something goes wrong with the mind, such a thing is not possible. The man has to collapse if something goes wrong with the mind. So therefore, even present pragmatism should have understood that something psychologically wrong should not be taken as something wrong with the mind. The problem is that the West thinks, or the modern world thinks, the mind is here. But the Eastern mysticism says that the mind is here. So therefore, for Eastern mind, if something is wrong here, it is not necessary to consider that something is wrong with the mind. But the West, having had the impression that the mind is here, anything wrong here implied that something wrong with the mind, and therefore that confusion came up. But then you can certainly imagine the condition that if something is wrong with the psychological faculty, any part of the brain, damaged brain, doesn't necessarily mean that the person should be physically weak. But something wrong with the mind will definitely affect the mind, whole body. When you have bout of depression, the depression comes to the mind, frustration, it reflects on the body. So well, such a clues have come in our life, but we have not taken note of those things. And we have continued to maintain the identity between something that is psychological and something that is mental. The Mentology, as I told you, the subject that is going to emerge. With that subject, or perhaps on account of a condition, that man will find a distinction between I and my mind. The subject will emerge on account of clues substantial clues taken into account, because the clues are there. The clues are there, but no account has been taken off. So if the account is taken off these experiences, where the clue will be that the I is different than the mind, that will launch the subject. Or the other probability is there that on account of such a subject coming up, the rational mind will come to a conclusion that the I is different than the mind. The man will reveal that I am not the mind. And those who have read the Indian philosophy have heard this several times. The soul is not the mind. Mind is matter. For metaphysics, the mind is matter. And here the yoga is going to make a very substantial contribution for such a subject to emerge, like Mentology or the psychology of the mind. But the thing is that we, being the students of yoga, we are fortunate. We already have practicals on objectification of the mind. One of the important aspects of yogic practices, intrinsic aspects of yogic practices, is to objectify the mind. In our business of life, we consider the mind as subjective entity. I know, I see, I hear, I feel. So the mind is considered as a subjective entity in us. That is what happens in business of life. Therefore we say, I am intelligent, I am stupid, I am wise, I am unwise, I am happy, I am sad. But in yoga psychology, the mind is objectified. The consciousness itself is objectified. And you should know that mind is one of the constituents of consciousness. The consciousness, as a yoga student should know, it is chitta. The chitta is constituted by three aspects: the mind, the intelligence, and the ego. Buddhi, ahankar, and manas. And the three together constitute the chitta. And now in yoga psychology, the mind, which is otherwise abstract, the teachers of yoga are supposed to put the mind in the test tube and make students objectify the mind. Because whatever is objectified must be away from us, and we must be able to look at it, experience it, either with the senses or with the mind. So unless something is objectified, we do not know. The process of knowing, process of knowledge, only gets launched if there is a knowable. This is the condition of epistemology. What is epistemology? Epistemology is the science of cognition, science of knowing. You know the thing only when the thing is an object. Unless the thing is an object, you will not know. And in yoga psychology, the teachers are supposed to give the experience to the students of the mind, and the possibility is only by objectifying the mind. As long as the mind is considered as a subjective entity, there is no chance of knowing it. Because Upanishads beautifully put it by saying how can you know the knower? Because the knower is the entity which knows. Imagine for a while, what is the process to know the knower itself? There is no process. So as long as the mind is considered as a subjective entity, never ever will there be a possibility that the mind can be known. Now you all as students of yoga know theoretically that in yoga mind is cultured. Well, if the mind is cultured, there must be some processes like heating, cooling, cutting, using sledgehammer, shaping, giving treatments to the mind. Like clay, you take clay and you give various shapes to clay. So if the mind is cultured, or if the mind is to be cultured, mind must be handled like something like clay. And then you have got to give treatment to the mind, like heating the mind, cooling the mind, cutting the mind, shaping the mind. And if yoga claims to be doing something of that nature, it is because yoga is able to objectify the mind. It is only in that case something can be done to the mind and mind can be cultured. You know the concept of evolution of consciousness. It implies that you are not the consciousness. Evolution of mind, it implies that you are not the mind. And that is why by objectifying the mind, the science of yoga, the practice of yoga, the religion of yoga, the philosophy of yoga, the art of yoga, the technology of yoga, he is able to do something for the mind. So already the infrastructure for such a subject like psychology of the mind or mentology is laid. And in the yoga psychology, what is called as auto-witnessing state, swasakshi bhava, auto-witnessing state, one witnesses oneself. What is that? One witnesses oneself, the self is not the soul. Because who can see the seer? The seer, the soul is the seer. Patanjali clearly says, drashta, drushimatraha, shuddhaha, vipratyaya, anupashya, in the second chapter. Drashta, the seer, is principle of consciousness only, pure principle of consciousness only, but something, something, something. So the soul is seer. So within this embodiment, there is obviously one seer. If there is one seer, who is going to see the seer? Therefore, the Indian philosophies are called as darshanas. Darshanam means reflection that you get in the mirror. When you see your reflection in the mirror, it is such a condition that you see yourself. At the same time, you don't see yourself, you see your reflection. If I keep the mirror in front of you, what will I say? This is me. So understand the realism and irrealism there, or realism and unrealism there, to the extent that it is my reflection, therefore it is me, but it is reflection, therefore it is not me. Are you getting it? In the mirror, when you look at your reflection, it is you, because what you see is you, your reflection. But it is not you, because it is your reflection. But although that is such a familiar concept in Indian philosophy, all other philosophies have only theorized around the concept that the mind is not the soul, the mind is an object. When it comes to the practicals of it, all those philosophers have to enter the laboratory which is given by yoga. Yoga is laboratory of mind, your own mind. Insofar as the body is concerned, if you consider it as a body, the laboratory of the body, that you know your body, Because many times I say in the classes, radiologists know where the liver is, but student of yoga can feel the liver. You follow? Radiologists can only point out that here is the liver. They know where the liver is. But perhaps Guruji can directly pinpoint at liver for his mind and can work on it. That is called physiological awareness. The radiologist does not have any physiological awareness, although they know what is where. So well, this you have experienced. You will feel the shin bone. The radiologist will not feel the shin bone. He knows the shin bone. With our skeletal muscular awareness, with our physiological awareness, we are in a position to get the feelings of various parts of the body and even perhaps organs of the body. So well, objectification of my body, it can be easily understood by you. You look at your shin and you say, this is my shin. You work with your shin, you work with your calf, you work with your femur, quadricep, bicep, whatever. So you can objectify and work on it. But in yoga psychology, when you proceed to higher practices, esoteric of asanas, particularly static asanas, like Shirshasana, Sarvangasana, Setuban Sarvangasana, Vipreet Karani, Halasana, static asanas, the advanced yoga student objectifies the brain, objectifies the eyes. Many times I have said in the classes, Shavasana classes, Pranayam classes, the eyes should be seen, ears should be heard, the brain should be thought about. Now usually what is the process? The brain is the thinker. The brain is the thinker, but in Shavasana, in meditative practices, the brain should be thought about. Just as you feel your shin bone or calf muscle, in your standing poses, or you feel your sternum or ribs or chest in your standing poses, or in your asanas, whatever might be the case. It is necessary that you feel your brain. Because that is also part of your body. Even if you think that you want to just work with your body in asanas and you don't want to transcend, you just want to work on the body itself and you do not want to transcend, you want to have a very, very, very fit body. And you want to have complete dedication to body to see that the body is absolutely fit. And what we call, as you have heard several times in Guruji's classes, total awareness. Can you exclude your brain in your total awareness? If total awareness implies that you should be aware of everything from the toes or cells in the tips of the toes to the cells in the fingertips, do you mean to say that the brain is to be excluded and there should be no awareness of the brain? So the very concept of total awareness, which you have heard several times perhaps in every class, that is the Bob word of Iyengar's teacher. You know what is the Bob word? You know bobbin in sewing machine? Bobbin in sewing machine. There is a thread in the bobbin and it comes and the stitching takes place with the thread on the top of the machine and from the bobbin. If the bobbin has exhausted, stitching will stop. So the weaving takes place with the bobbin that comes, or the thread that comes from the bobbin, and the thread that is on the top of the head of the sewing machine, and the stitching takes place because of the two threads interlocking. So there is such a word, and although it's most of the English community, I am sorry that you have not known this word, although I know this word. It is not my creation, let me tell you frankly, because you know that I am good in coining words, if not anything else. Well, it's not my word. I have not coined this word. This word is there, Bob word. So, total awareness is the shout of every Iyengar teacher. Now when you say total awareness, Even if you say that it is body, the brain is your body. The eyes are your part of body. It's also part of body. Ears part of your body. So there is nothing absurd in saying that see your eyes. Eyes should be seen, ears should be heard, brain should be thought about, mind should be felt. What are you doing in the process? In Shavasana you are supposed to feel your eye, you are supposed to see your eyes. Eyes should be seen, eyes should be objectified. Ears are to be heard. Now in business of life, the eyes are instruments of hearing. Now you cannot hear your ears. But if you are in Shavasana, your ears will become object of audition. Do you follow? Now if I say hear your ears, you will not hear anything apart from my shout. There is no possibility of you hearing your ears. But that is what happens in Shavasana. And that can happen, that happens. And we have not paid any heed to such a glorious thing which subverts the whole empirical process. See, we have got to acknowledge so many things which we don't think, we don't do it. When I tell you now that the whole empirical process is reversed, then you will understand it's a glorious thing that we get in yoga class. So don't get carried away when I say hear your ears and look at your eyes. It happens in Shavasana, it should happen in Shavasana. It should happen in a meditative state. So also the brain is thought about. The brain is a thinker all the time. But when the brain is thought about, obviously the brain is objectified. So another marvel in yoga psychology which has gone unnoticed, unacknowledged. The mind, which is a feeler, which feels the pains and pleasures and all sorts of experiences. No experience comes without mind. No senses can work without the mind. If there is no mind in the eyes, you won't see me. I might be right in presence of you with so many lights. But if your mind is elsewhere, you will not see me. So the mind is a feeler. It feels. But in this yoga psychology, the mind is felt. And when the mind is felt, you juxtapose the mind to your existence. Like in description of yogic meditative practices, it is expressed thus that just as the buttermilk, the butter is so intrinsic to buttermilk, it is in the buttermilk cannot be seen. Even with microscopes you will not see butter in buttermilk. But when the churning takes place, when the churning process is on, the butter is separated from the buttermilk. And once the butter is separated from the buttermilk, although it is in water, it is untouched by water. Right? The butter, although it has surfaced from that material, once it is surfaced, once it is butter, although it is in the water, it is floating on the water, it is untouched by water. This is what happens in meditative aspects of yoga. And glorious experiences are had provided you know the psychodynamics of asanas. Like Shirshasana, Sarvangasana, Setuvan Sarvangasana, Halasana, Viprit Karne, even poses like Viprit Dandasana. I said the other day, Guruji stays in half an hour for Viprit Dandasana. Not as punishment, like we get it. It's a reverse prostration, and after such a prostration, obviously what is the state of the mind? Suppose you prostrate your Guruji, what is your state of mind? The pure mind, sublime mind, sedate mind, accomplished mind, contented mind. That is the effect after prostrations. So try to understand what is implied in the very term Viparita Dandasana. Reverse prostration, what should be the effect of it? So therefore you should know psychodynamics of the pose, not merely what to do with this muscle and that bone and this joint and that cartilage. There is much more than that. Because Viparidandasana is done by the senses, by the mind, by the consciousness, which doesn't have muscles and joints and bones. But is that not the part of your body? That's also part of your body. So from the breath, mind and awareness and all that abstract aspects to the physical body ending at the skin, everything is body. And therefore in total awareness, now you can question yourself what is implied in total awareness, not just this skin, flesh, muscles, bones, cells, fibers, etc., etc. Because that is not you totally. But at least you now understand that the mind is very much part of it. And therefore in asanas there is something like psychodynamics. It means what should the mind do and what should happen to the mind in the pose. We know what the body should do in Tadasana. But equally there is technique, what should the mind do in Tadasana. That's why many times say the asana need not be photogenic. See, I can be giving you a beautiful Tadasana pose, but if the mind is somewhere else, it is possible. And with maturity particularly. If person is matured in Tadasana, well, he can be doing two things at a time. Tadasana plus something. Do you follow? So therefore, there are techniques of the mind. What should the mind do in Tadasana? You know what the mind should be doing while Tadasana is being composed, while it is being done. In the doing stage, you know that this should be felt, that should be felt. You know what the mind should be doing, feeling everything from the toes, forepart of the feet, forepart, back part, bottom of the foot. From there you know every segment of the leg and trunk and up to the shoulder or perhaps neck, and if you are advanced, you will think up to the crown of the head. Well, it also implies that is the action of the mind, but what should the mind do once the Tadasana is in done state? Mind is not supposed to do anything then, as I told you on that day. The doing must come to an end. As long as doing is going on, mind will be doing and doing and doing, and you can identify the action of the mind. I feel this, I feel that the mind is feeling the feet, ankles, shank, shin, thighs, waist, pelvis, pelvic wall, abdominal wall, thoracic wall, shoulders, armpits, arms, biceps, triceps, forearms, palms, fingertips. So you can know the role of the mind, what the mind should do while the pose is being done, but what should the mind be when the pose is done? You have got to question that. Once the pose is done, Tadasana is done, you know that the body has done it. What about the mind? What is its state when Tadasana is done and doing has now been accomplished? So there is something like psychodynamics in asanas. That is, what should the mind do and what should happen to the mind. So with all that, we come to a state where the mind is objectified, and obviously when the mind is objectified, the mind becomes other than us. Do you get it? The moment you objectify the mind becomes other than you. Therefore, the mind and I are not identical. This is how the psychological aspects of Mentology will give us the derivation that mind is not the soul, which the metaphysics has already given. Metaphysics from time without beginning has declared that mind is not the soul. That is why such a concept is so intrinsic to Indian philosophy, that mind is not the soul. Now, although you have not had any religious, spiritual experience now, because you are merely listening to me, I have not taken you to any religious state or spiritual state. You are in very, very temporal state, right? In the temporal state, have you not conceptualized that the mind is not you? Yes or no? Thank you.